Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
Well, the one thing that I remember, I am Helen, in case you don't recognize my voice. One thing I remember about my mother was that she was always so proud of her beautiful brown hair. And it was beautiful and thick. And she even used to take, what's the weeds out in the field? Oh my goodness. Sage. She would bring the sage in and boil it. And when her hair started getting a little bit gray, because that was like we use as a dye now, and it kind of. And then she used bluing, and I never liked that on her hair. But she said she never liked white hair, and I said, Mother, our prophet, I said, his beautiful white hair, President David O. McKay, and I said, makes him look so distinctive. Well, this is what I think was kind of comical. Mother tried so hard to get Evelyn to dye her hair because Evelyn was going gray quite young, which all of us have. And Mother really hated to see Evelyn go gray. But Evelyn, I think, always had in her mind that she liked to look like Sister Critchlow, dignified and all. And her husband was gray. And one time, someone asked Jerry if Evelyn was his daughter. And that really done it for Jerry. And Jerry definitely did not want Evelyn to look like his daughter. So he encouraged her to keep the gray hair. But Mother, as time went on, and she kept saying she never did care for the white hair. Well, then here, Shauna, Evelyn's daughter Shauna, started going gray. And Evelyn never wanted to dye her hair, but she encouraged Shauna to dye her hair. She said, I would not listen to my mother, but I know now what my mother means, that I was much too young to be that gray, that I would have been. So anyway, Mother, I hope Mother likes her pretty white hair. I like my pretty white hair. I think the Lord knew what he was doing when your skin gets older and have the white hair.
I guess I've got to get
You don't want them.
I got to get white hair to look like an angel.
Okay, this is now about Grandma's disciplinarian.
She is dead than to commit, or than to. Mother said, Mother and Dad made us feel like they'd like to see us brought in on
Oh, Mother wasn't strict as a disciplinarian, but she expected us to obey her and do what was right. Now, when it came time for...
Just a minute. Now, Reva's talking and she's listening.
When it came time to be disciplined, I don't ever remember being spanked by my mother. I don't know whether she did spank anybody else, but she used to just look at us and those eyes would tell us that we were doing something wrong. When things got so very bad that Mother and Dad thought something should be done, then Dad did it. Yeah, it was always, you wait till your dad gets home and I tell him about you. And that's all she needed to say, because we knew what Dad would do. For church, she expected us to be quiet. She expected us to do the right thing. But she put up with no tomfoolishness, but she didn't put up with it. It was Dad who made us do. Would take us out and spank us once, and we never had to go out and be spanked again. So we knew what we had to do and what was expected of us. Now, we are not perfect children, and maybe we caused them a lot of trouble, but still, we did not have real cruel mother and dad, because neither one of them believed in just beating you. They just looked at you, or they talked to you, or they demanded that you be quiet, and you were quiet.
Talk about that thing they got to see about
Well, I think we all heard it. We were told that to lose our virtue was the worst thing that could ever happen to us. And that if we did that, they would rather see us brought home. I don't remember them saying in a coffin, but dead.
Just so many words.
That. But you asked what were some of Mother's talents, and one of the talents I'd have to say Mother had was a way to make children love her. She taught primary for almost 50 years. And every little child in her class absolutely adored her. And they all had to learn their articles of faith. And there would be some little children whose parents wouldn't help them and who weren't very bright. And every time I'd go over to Mother's house to pick up Scott, to take him home, there would be one of those little children there. And she would be teaching them the articles of faith. They didn't get out of Mother's primary class without knowing the articles of faith. And Mom always, another thing she was an excellent cook. And she made the best bread in absolutely all the world. And then she would, besides the bread, then
She made good pies.
Did she ever? You tell about some of the delicious things she cooked.
You go on.
Hazel, you
Tell
us.
about the pie and stuff.
Well, I know my dad liked her pies. He just really thought they were the greatest in the world, and I think they were. But you know what? She made them with lard.
That's the trick, isn't it?
And that was the secret. They made good pies if you knew how. Yeah, she was the greatest stepmother a girl ever had.
Okay, did you want to add some more about the cook?
She made really good baking powder biscuits.
Yeah.
I remember. They were
Good
so
rice
good.
pudding and good boiled
And we
beans.
mentioned rice pudding and the brown beans on the back of the coal stove and
Every wash day we
And
had a great
cottage
big
cheese.
kettle boiled.
oh, cottage cheese, homemade cottage cheese. We just loved that. And we loved head cheese that they made.
Dad had a lot to do with making the head cheese.
I'm sure.
People think we're crazy when we say that head cheese was delicious, but
What is
that
head
head
cheese?
cheese was delicious. Well, they take a cow's head and I guess take the hair off and clean it and boiled it, and then they tore off all the meat. Now, what else they put in it, I don't know. Spices and different things. What?
Especially seasoning. The dad.
Mm-hmm. And then it would something that would make it set like your lunch meat. And, jelly just real. And then you'd slice it.
You get it
It
cold.
was heavenly. We all just loved it. And now every time I tell a friend about head cheese, they go, oh, I think it's, you just don't know. But another thing they loved, they'd take these baking powder biscuits that Mary said were so good. And then Mother would make this gravy. How'd they make that gravy?
Well, the reason Mother's gravy was so good is she cooked the steaks and hamburger. It was the best tasting meat, wasn't it? But she, for nowadays, I would say it's well done, not medium rare. I think Mother cooked it well done. And she always put flour on the meat. And, of course, when she made the gravy, she used the milk. And that milk gravy...
I stirred it.
And the milk gravy had a lot of the flakes of the meat in it. Not strained, so it was clear gravy. It had a lot of this meat in it. And that's why her milk gravy was so good.
Now, tell them about her.
Another delicacy Mother made was tomato soup. And she would heat the tomatoes in one pan and the milk in another. And when she got them to just the right temperature, which was not too hot, then she would put in some soda and put them together. And she put in a little thickening, milk, flour, a little thickening to it, and then her spices, and nothing tasted better.
You'd better remember this, Sharron. Didn't Mother ever bring you over one of those lard cans full of cookies? Didn't she ever bring them to you?
No, I just remember her rice pudding and chocolate milk when I went there to practice after school. She had that.
Well, she used to make these cookies,
Well, I remember her cookies were
and this rat right here,
Helen.
she was the one that could find them. And Mother would always give us each an even amount, and then she'd put all the rest of them away to save for Daddy. And she could find them, and she was the only one in the family, and she'd never squeal. So none of the rest of us ever
Don't
got
know how to make the cookies.
But
Well, I think
those,
Evelyn got the recipe. I think we tried.
oh, we tried it. It wasn't good.
Mother was the best dressmaker. We always had a new dress for the summer that she made for the 4th of July. And then we had a best dress made for Christmas. And usually we would have lace and ruffles and voiles and organdies for the spring.
Hazel added always a new Easter dress.
And the Easter dress was, and an Easter bonnet, yeah. And she had a knack of putting the right color on you that fit the coloring of our hair and our eyes. And then for Christmas, she would make us a velveteen, we called it, dress, and they were always beautifully embroidered with flowers or whatever.
And always used to do that because Mother
Twins, navy blue.
And Olive always used to do the embroidery work.
No, she didn't. I did a lot of it.
And that Ruth did too.
Well, yeah, they made, both Ruth and I, velvet, and as I remember, it was kind of a dark bluish, and there was little tiny beads all over it. And to this day, I always kept it as a souvenir. But I understood that Aunt Olive, it was hard for Mother to put the beads on. And you, Ruth, helped, and Aunt Olive, but I don't ever remember sewing beads on. But I'll never forget that dress as long as I live. It was very special to me.
And when she made those two for you two, for Mary and me, she dressed us alike, and we were in that red pongee material, they used to call it pongee, and our dresses had all lace, gathered lace, done up like this all around the skirts and around, they were so cute. And then you'd pull up the dress, and there would be pants to match with the lace and everything. And we'd walk down the street, and the ladies would come, oh, where did you get that dress? Oh, where did you buy that dress? And Mother would say, well, I made it. And, oh, would you make one for me? And Mother would say, I'm sorry, I don't have time. And then she'd pull our dresses up to see our pants, and I would be so embarrassed, have ladies pulling my dresses.
She made up bloomers.
Oh, yeah, the bloomers were red pongee with the white lace.
Mine always had to say blue.
They had it, Mom.
And how she gave us.
We wore these bloomers from the knee, above the knee, clear to the waist. And so we really didn't need petticoats or anything because they completely covered it. And bless her heart, I love her.
I remember a real special dress. I was probably about in the 9th grade that I had. It was beautiful maroon. Would you say taffeta or taffeta? And it was just up to the knees in front and to the floor and back. And I just felt elegant in that. Then my graduation dress was all pink. I think it was a pink satin slip underneath with a pink net of about a 2-inch ruffles from the waist on down. I don't know what yours. I don't know what yours was. But she used flour sacks to make us aprons, and even after we were.
She had kind of a sewing machine she sewed on.
Yeah, and the old white pedal sewing machine, treadle sewing machine, and she bleached the flour sacks and make slips and everything out of that. Pants and made the boys and girls their bras and their pants and their shirts.
Every Christmas you made shirts for all your grandchildren, all boys.
You say that again, every Christmas?
Every Christmas she made shirts for the grandsons and aprons for the girls.
And Carl said that those aprons were adorable. And she could just take any old material she had left over and put it together so beautifully. And our aprons were just adorable. And Carl said, "Oh, your mother should have gone into being
An economist?
No, the kind of a person who designs clothes."
Oh.
He said she just had natural knack.
Okay, this is touching on the Depression a little.
Mother and Dad were famous for bringing in the tomatoes, the peaches, the string beans, everything. We always had a lot of bottled fruit put up. And Mary and I'd come home. This is when we were going to Weber High. And we'd come home and we'd open a 2-quart bottle of tomatoes. And we'd put a little salt and pepper on it. And we would eat a slice of homemade bread. Sometime we didn't have butter. We had lard, plain lard. We smoothed it across our bread and put salt and pepper. And we thought that was a real treat.
When Mother lived in Logan, when she was older, she had a neighbor next door who used to tat beautiful handkerchiefs. So Mother would buy handkerchiefs from her through the year, and then we would get them for our birthdays. And that we sure missed because they were the most gorgeous things for us when we were older.
Hazel remembers they paid their tithing every month, even if it was 2-quart bottles of fruit.
Whatever Mother had put up, but they always paid their tithing, even if it wasn't cash.
Our father had to work for what they called the WPA, and that was one of the most, to him, disgraceful things that could happen. You worked and got paid by going down and standing in a big, long line, and at the end of the line, why then they'd give you some, whatever, maybe a sack of sugar, a sack of flour, or something like that. That was what? Bad work with him.
When they put the gas line down the Weber Canyon and all done.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things that Daddy said that was so hard on him, he was so proud that was embarrassing to him. One of the things that was so terribly embarrassing or disgusting to him really is Daddy had high blood pressure from the time he was in his 20s, and he knew it was damaging his heart. And yet his bosses would make him pick up one end of a big pipe or a big board and carry one side of it, and then to put 2 men down at the other end to carry the other side of it. And then he said other times he'd get so tired that he'd just feel he needed to rest. But if he rested, the boss was right up there giving him the dickens. But the men that smoked could stand around and smoke all day long, and it was all right because they were smoking.
Now to something more pleasant. in a good year, and this happened year after year, Dad would go to them, take us all, and go out to the farmer's place. And we would come home with bags of potatoes and carrots, turnips, squash, anything that had been grown that year. And then we would take it all home and put it in our cement basement. And it was there for us anytime we were hungry. So Mother cooked from that, and we went and ate from it, feasted on it whenever we wanted something. We'd go get a carrot or a potato or something fresh food. And no one ever told us to stop eating. We had
Except the peanut butter. Tell about that. They would hide it because we'd eat it so fast. To this
I'll
day,
have
it's never been.
And Dad also worked at CCMI Wholesale. And he used to bring home boxes of crackers and peanut butter in bottles and all kinds of food. As it got a little older, he'd bring it home or they would deliver it to our house. And we used to be free to go and eat whenever they wanted. But peanut butter was kind of special.
Well, the reason they had the peanut butter, they got in one day, because we loved it. It was a real treat. So Daddy would hide it and bring it out every once in a while, and we'd have some peanut butter on our bread. And I can understand that, because I guess it cost quite a bit then. But to this day, I've never been out of peanut butter, but I'm not a peanut butter eater. But the one thing that I remember is on Thanksgiving and Christmas holidays, they would have yams and sweet potatoes. I loved them hot, I loved them cold. And I was so glad that there was some left over for the next day. And to this day, I have yams about once a week. But the peanut butter is something else. I can take or leave it.
When Dad went to Chicago to learn to be an electrician, he stored a lot of that stuff in a cellar that was beneath the kitchen floor. There was a trap door in the kitchen floor, and you lift that up and go down the stairs to get all this stuff. And nobody would go down there but me, because there were spiders.
Was that in Salt Lake?
I was in Salt Lake. And we'd have starved to death if I had been scared of spiders. I wouldn't go get any.
Well, I think I was started for.
But I tell you, maybe you don't want to record it.
No, yeah, I do.
We had an outside toilet, and Mary was scared to go out after dark. She wouldn't go to the toilet. She'd stand there and hop around the kitchen and try begging somebody to go with her. And
Was that in Ogden?
I was in Salt Lake,
Don't find me.
in the same place where we stored the cabbages and stuff in
I
the
don't
cellar.
remember the outside toilet.
Constipation problem. They lived in a red brick building.
There were 3 or 4 in a row, and we lived in the last one. So outside our door, our bathroom made a turn there. And so you'd go outdoors to get to the door, but you were inside this lavatory room.
Where was that? I never.
This was in Salt Lake. Well, what kind of an outside toilet do you think we had?
Reva say that.
Well, the one you and I went to see a few
Say we
years
didn't have an
ago,
inside toilet until after you were married.
I don't remember having an inside toilet until after I was married.
Yeah, we had inside one.
Well, but one thing that
Out the door here, and what's over here, and went in the door.
Well, I don't remember that, but I'll tell you something I do remember. One time I walked over to Mother's house after everybody had gone to work, and I had my baby Brent with me. And when I came in the house, Mother and Dad had an inside toilet line there. And I went in to find Mother, watched Mother, and do you know what she was doing? She was washing Evelyn's underwear. They were laying all over the floor, anywhere Evelyn wanted to drop them, and Mama was picking them all up daintily and washing them and hanging them up. And I said to Mama, "You're washing Evelyn's underwear?" And she says, "You can mind your own business." I said, "You never washed any of mine."
She had too many at the same age. That was the problem.
Really, the first outside toilet that I remember was in Ogden, in front of the graveyard. So we had to walk out there, and the toilet was right in front of the fence of the graveyard. So, and of course, we were high school age then. That was up until the time I was married. And we had the outside toilet. And so I'd always get Helen or somebody to go out the toilet with me, It's in front of the graveyard.
I hate it. Did you know
We lived right by the cemetery, which is still there and growing. But in those days, we were, 100 yards in front of inside the fence. And guess what happened over in the cemetery? Ruth got her diamond from Owen over there, and Helen got her diamond from Mark over there. Not at the same time, but that's where we were both engaged, was in the cemetery behind the building.
I used to baby tend some people that were way down past the graveyard. You had to pass all of the graveyard and then go about another block and a half. And people in those days did not take the children home. You baby tended and then you walked home. And as I was coming back, there was a dog that came out and started barking. And he scared me so badly that I walked up into the cemetery and walked all the way home through the cemetery.
That was the safest.
It's funny, isn't it? But that cemetery was a fun place for us.
Okay, let Mom, either that or turn it off.
That's where I'm going
Let
to
her
marry.
turn it off.
And he got
Daddy always said the dead were the best neighbors you could have. Helen, say what you said about the cemetery. I didn't.
Well,
You said you were never bothered by the
I was
cemetery.
never bothered by the cemetery because we lived by it. It was part of our neighbors. They were the best neighbors you could ever have because they never bothered. It was quiet, and we go to our fireside every Sunday. We was the first in the whole United States of starting the fireside. And we have records of that, and I was the chorister. And Zach Stevens' brother, Earl, was the president, I remember. And Mary was the first secretary. So to me, the cemetery...
I was the president. I was the president at the time when Owen was on his mission. And so that was quite an honor. But the cemetery was a place of quiet, peace, dark, and a pleasant place to be.
I had a boyfriend that worked in the cemetery, and he thought it was the most exciting place to be. He said, all of a sudden, somebody come running out of the house with somebody after him, as mad as they could be. He says, I got more kick out of the fight for
chasing me out.
screaming or yelling. They said to me, they all gathered around, and she said, doesn't she look like Rosa? I get sentimental every time I tell about it. And I never had met her. I never had
But
seen
Hazel
her.
looked like Rosa.
See, we know so little about her that it's just a treat to us to hear.
She was a nurse.
Hazel, she was a nurse.
Hazel, weren't you to the park? What's the name of the park out here in Ogden?
This right here, South Ogden.
No, Larn Farr.
Oh, Lauren.
We went to a Blair reunion,
That's where it was.
and it was at Larn Farr Park. Well, I remember that.
Do you?
Now, see,
Well,
I knew we had to get these two older ones here. They'd remember things that us the younger ones didn't remember.
she was beautiful.
Was she red-haired?
She had auburn-colored hair.
Listen, the most important thing about that reunion was that everybody was red-headed. I mean, everybody had that bright red hair. So you looked around the park and you said, "Oh, that's a Blair."
Ruth Seddery, their mother, was red-headed. She was singing at a street meeting, an LDS street meeting in England, and the man she married, Isaac Blair, heard this beautiful voice, and he was interested. He had to see who it was. It was on a Sunday. He was on his way to church, I understand. I'm not sure. But when he got close, he could see that it was Ruth. And they got acquainted with each other. He was only 18. And she was younger. And they got acquainted and got married. They lived in England until, they had part of their family. And I'd have to have a family group sheet in order to designate which ones. But one of the authorities of the church told her that she would go to Utah and she would drive her own carriage. And they later took ship. Now this came to Utah. That all of this information is in Aunt Ruth's story.
Well, do we have copies of
I,
that?
This interview is taken now on June 5th, 1995. We're at Ruth Gladwell's house, and this we have Hazel Brady and Ruth Gladwell, and then Mary Allen and Reva Wallace and Helen Stevens, and who we have previously interviewed. So mainly today we'll be getting from Ruth and Hazel.
I remember as a little girl that we went to the Blair reunion at Lawrence Farm Park, and what an amazing experience it was. I often wondered where I got my red hair from, but after going to the Blair reunion, I had no questions. Everybody there had bright red hair. It was a beautiful sight to see. And they'd say, "What's that red-headed person over there?" And I'd say, "Which red-headed person?" But we spent...
I must not have been born yet, or there'd have been one person that didn't have red hair. They'd have said, "Who's that bald-headed person?"
Well, this didn't have anything to do with us. This was the Blairs. The family had a good time, like any reunion, because they were all members of the same family. And we felt a little bit out because we were Dad's side of the family. But this line was from Dad's side. The enjoyment of the reunion was try to get acquainted with these people and to keep them separated because they all looked alike. And I remember as a child that it was quite a wonderful experience to know that you belong to the Blairs, because there are Blairs in Ogden, and we could somehow put ourselves together with them. But it was, as a child, a very exciting reunion because of the red hair.
Add to that, Hazel?
well, the red hair came from Ruth Seddery. She was singing at a street meeting, at LDS street meeting in England, and the man that she married heard it, and he had to look until he found that where that beautiful voice was coming from. And they became acquainted and got married and had a family and finally came to Utah. But she had the red hair. She was the first one that I know of.
Was this on Grandpa Knowles? Was this on Grandpa Knowles' side or Grandma Knowles' side?
Grandpa Knowles, on our father's side, his mother was Rosa Blair, who had red hair. She had beautiful auburn hair, thick and heavy from what Dad used to say. He got his heavy hair from everybody.
Just like me. Yep. I remember.
This is about Rosa Blair.
All I remember about her was that she was a very well-educated lady. She was a lady. She was not poor like the Knowles family. So when she wanted to marry into the Knowles family, her mother and father greatly objected because they were not educated and they were not on her line. But she wouldn't hear to this. She said, no, this is the man I'm going to marry, and I'm going to marry him whether he's got any money or anything else. So she did. And that is where... Where did you get that? From Dad. And if any of this seems a little hard to swallow, remember that that's where you and I got our culture from, was dear Grandpa.
Culture.
Yes, we do. We come from the royal line.
Do you have anything to add for Rosa Blair?
She was a nurse. She was very well educated, is true, and she was a nurse, a practicing nurse. And I, at one time, was talking with mother in the kitchen in Logan, and she said, Helen. Oh, Dad always said Helen was more like his mother than any of the girls.
Daddy said, because I was so outgoing, leading the games and leading the singing, always in the limelight, and that's the way his mother was. So he told Mother many a time that I reminded.
And I said, can you imagine Helen delivering a baby?
Well,
No, Daddy told me this, and it was quite heartbreaking to him. He said that the Blairs didn't like the Knowleses, and it wasn't for just this reason, but Grandpa Knowles smoked. Now, if you remember back in those days, keeping the word of wisdom wasn't the serious thing it is now. They took more of the attitude that was not a commandment. It was just.
But we have all this already down.
The lesson. And so, but it was the smoking that they objected to too, as well as not being as well educated. But the sad thing about that whole thing is that Grandpa Knowles was very intelligent. From what Daddy said about him, our grandpa was a very intelligent man and felt very bad that he wasn't able to do more for his children. But he said, but I only did one bad thing. I smoked. I told you not to, but you didn't listen to me, you watched me. And I always felt so bad about that.
and then then Grandma Knowles, of course, asked them all to quit smoking when she died.
And they all did,
Yeah,
but they all started up again except Daddy.
When Grant was very ill in the hospital in Salt Lake, he was dying of cancer of the throat and the lips. And Mother went to see him. I remember this myself. She went to see him in the hospital in Salt Lake, even though Grandpa, her husband, was dead. She went down to see Grant. And while he was there, he asked for a cigarette. And Mother said, Grant, you are dying of cancer. why are you asking for a cigarette? And he said, because I can't stand it any longer without it. And I know that I should stop, that I am going to have that cigarette. So give it to me. And Mother said she sat there and watched him as he smoked one of the last cigarettes that he was ever able to smoke.
Say everyone,
I know this happened because Mother told me about it right here in Ogden after she had been down and had seen them.
Because Uncle, he had regard for Mother. He liked Mother, and he always went to visit her.
Mrs. Grant.
Yeah.
And you know, his sister.
Yeah.
And she was a sweet lady. She's the one that had 3 sets of twins. But she just loved Mother. She called her Belle. And one day they had to come to Ogden to take to either buy things or to take some of the children or someone to the doctor. And then her husband said, well, we've got to get you home. So she must have been quite sick then. He says, we just got to get you home. And she said, I should say not. Do you think for 1 minute I'd get to Ogden and go back without seeing Belle? And say Belle was her sister-in-law.
You lived at home.
some memories you have of, does that ring a bell?
That's such a long time ago to ask an old
That's
lady.
probably a general.
When we were living in Ogden, I was by this time old enough to know what was going on. And Dad was very fair, but very strong in discipline.
Very strict.
And he used to take a belt and use it on one of us that wasn't doing what we're supposed to be doing. Now, we lived in Pocatello before this, and always on the 4th of July, they had a big carnival come. And this carnival, Dad gave each one of us a dime, of which we could spend the way we wanted. And you could go on the Ferris wheel for a dime, or you could spend it on candy or whatever you wanted. But we were about 2 blocks from the carnival. So we went as a family and spent the day there. And each one of us spent our dime the way we wanted. But each one of us treasured it so much that we spent the whole day making our decision. So I finally made the decision to go on the Ferris wheel, which I did, and it was most enjoyable. But we stayed and stayed all day long until the light got dim, and then we went home.
And I shouldn't tell you what I spent my
This is Hazel
dime
now.
for, but I was going to make a lot of money. I was going to turn that dime into plenty of money. So I went to a table where they had everything spread out, the states of the Union, it seems to me, and you put your dime on the right spot, you won a lot of money. And I put my dime on a spot in Utah, and it didn't win any money. I saw him drag my dime away, and I didn't get anything. Didn't get anything.
Funny, and we were used to
Reva.
Did he buy a home there? You said he did.
Yeah.
What? Did he buy a home?
He was
Well,
servicing. When they after they moved to Montpelier, and he got work servicing the Maytag motors, and they had found a great market for all these washing machines because these people had never been able to have a washing machine until the Maytag moved up there and they brought in the machines with motors on them. So Mother went with him, and while she demonstrated how to wash, he was fixing the motors. And between the two of them, she sold a lot of washing machines, and he fixed a lot. So they earned enough money to buy a home.
And you took care of us kids while
I was married.
The reason why, this was the reason why we had money. But what I remember is that we had a system where you, the three of us, washed the dishes, dried the dishes, put them away. And then the next day, wash the dishes, dry the dishes, put them away. But and then on payday, Daddy would go to the grocery store and pay for the groceries we'd use through the week, and they'd give him a big sack of candy. So he'd come home with that big sack of candy, and then he'd give each one of us a dime to go to the show. But we had to get the dishes done fast enough so that we could get to the show on time. And that was where we first heard of Clara Bow and all those kind of people.
Okay, tell us about the funness of his personality.
Oh my goodness!
Or what you did on holidays.
On holidays, we usually went for a ride. He'd always buy, when we lived on 7th Avenue, he'd always buy a great big 5-gallon can of ice cream, and we would eat ice cream all day long.
Bring us these big cases of soda pop. You remember that?
And that was only on holidays.
And tell us, Reva, then, you said that he was a strict disciplinarian, but that you always knew that he loved you. And tell us about this fun type of his personality and what you did on holidays.
Well, Daddy was always a joker. Lots of fun. For instance,
Great sense of humor.
yes, for instance, we came home from school one day, and he says, he put his hand over the chin of his face and said, "Have you seen my new cow?" And we all looked at him. So funny, and we looked at his hand, and there was no ring or no anything, or I mean nothing on it. And so we did what we always did. We looked at Mama's face. She couldn't tell a lie if she tried. So the minute that we didn't know what Daddy was talking about, we'd look at Mama, and Mama'd always be looking down like this, like she wishes she could hide it. But then we'd know darn well Daddy was just teasing us. But he was oodles of fun. He would take us outside, and we'd all play ball together. Don't you remember that?
Yeah.
Oh, we had lots of fun playing ball together. And and then he'd sit down at the piano, and he could just thump away. Just thump the chords away. And he'd say, "Hey, you be damned," said I. And he made everybody, all our friends, feel so at home that our house, we had a big front room and dining room, we're full every Sunday. And just yesterday, I was talking to a friend, and that friend said to me, "Reva, do you know what I remember about your folks?" And I said, "No, what?" And she says, "Whenever we'd come over to your house, why, your mom and dad were they'd always welcome us in."
We have this already in the...
And we,
I've already typed that up. Well, let me ask Ruth now about her, before we get on to a different subject, what are your remembrances of that you knew Grandpa loved you and that his fun personality? Maybe that's not, or if that just...
Dad was just, his big thing was he was interested in you. and he wanted to hear what you had to say. And so when he knew that I had special things in school, he wanted to hear all about it. And somehow, if he could, he'd be there to see or hear me. And he was interested in fun things. Fun things was baseball. We loved it. That was one thing.
Tell about electricity and sharpness.
Oh, and he always knew how to tease us with electricity. He used to take it and just touch you, and you jump or squeal, and you get a big kick out of what you were doing. But he also knew the electricity well enough to know how much he could give you, how much you could take before you got the shock. And Dad always saw the open end of something. If he felt that you needed to know something about something, he always kind of left it at a point, an open end, where you would come and ask him some more about it.
About the balls of fruit and everything was spoiled, but he said it was good.
Oh, and we used to eat, sometimes we used to eat rotten food because Dad said it was good for us.
It was moldy on the top.
And,
Helen said it was moldy on the top.
Well, he'd clear that off and then he'd eat it.
He'd clear off the mold and then he'd eat it.
and he would take meat that was spoiling like, and he made Mother cook it real well, but he said that it wouldn't hurt us, so we'd eat it.
We have several things we can tell about that. Tell about how intelligent he was and how he knew the script.
Tell us, Hazel, about his knowledge of the gospel.
Well, of course, because I don't have that good a knowledge of the gospel, I can't tell you how he knew and what he said. But I do remember him reading it. And I think that I got a lot of information in my head from the scriptures, because Dad would read out loud to Mother all the time, and she was busy about the kitchen and one thing and another, and he would read to her. And there's a lot of times I would read the scripture, and I know that, and then I'd remember it was Dad reading to it. So there's one thing I can tell you about that. You could not lie to those blue eyes, no matter what you had in mind. You couldn't look at him. Those blue eyes, I can see them yet. And you couldn't think of telling a lie with eyes like he had.
Yeah, just as blue as the blue.
Let me tell you about
Okay, Aunt Ruth now.
You want to know about how Dad learned some of these things. When Dad was a young man, he went to work for the railroad. And he made up his mind that he was going to read. And they had a lot of real cheap novels out there for the men to keep themselves busy with. So Dad used to read this stuff the best he could by matching word with words. And would read it, but he didn't know one thing he was reading. So one day, one of the good men of the place said, "Clarence, do you know what you're reading?" And Clarence said, "No." And he said, "That's the most filthy stuff I have ever heard. And I knew you didn't know what you were reading about." So he said, "If you want to learn to read, let me get you some better books." Now that's what started Dad wanting to learn to read. So he taught himself as he worked on the railroad at night how to read. Then after he got married, and some of us were a little bit old enough to know what was happening, he used to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning, and it was cold. So he would light a fire in the kitchen, make it warm, and there he would study the Bible and the Book of Mormon. And in doing so, he was able to read these things and understand them. And he got so that he could talk in the high priest classes and these different ones about any of these subjects. Then when I was a college graduate at Utah State University, I had to meet with the dean of the School of Education. And so when I was called in, and he said, "Your name is Knowles, Knowles." And I said, "Yes. Do you know Clarence Knowles?" And I said, "Well, of course, he's my father." He said, "Would you answer me a few questions?" And I said, "Well, if I can." Now, you are graduating from university, and your father was so knowledgeable about the gospel that all of us who were in the class were mostly doctors and did not know that Brother Knowles did not have a college degree. But he said, whenever a question would come up, Brother Knowles would listen to our answers, and then when he finished, he would say, "Brethren, that is not what it says," and then he would quote the scripture and explain it the way it is. He said we were so amazed at him that we often said, how did Brother Knowles know all these things when he could not read like we read, and he has not been to school like we've been to school, and yet we doctors sit here in amazement at his knowledge of the gospel. And I have wondered for many, many years how I could get an answer. So when you came in here and said that Clarence Knowles was your father, I could not pass up this opportunity. Now tell me, how did he know all these things? And I said, because he loved the gospel. He taught it to us every day after dinner around the dinner table. And he explained all these things to us that he understood and knew so well. And then he got confidence enough to talk in class when you people were wrong, and he knew the right answers. And that's how Clarence Knowles learned the gospel and what he knew.
Thank you, Ruth. Okay, Hazel.
Is it ready?
Uh-huh.
He loved the gospel, Ruth says, but he had an undying testimony that was so personal he wouldn't talk about it. But it convinced him that the gospel was true, and he never forgot it. Now, what was I?
You were going to talk about his knowledge of the Book of Mormon. You said you had something to say about how he got this knowledge.
Nothing except that he prayed. He prayed to get a testimony, and he got it. That's all I can say, because I know he had a personal testimony that it was too sacred to him to talk about. But there was one thing I was going to say. When Ruth mentioned that he went upstairs and built a fire and warmed up the room and studied the gospel, he read all the scriptures. And I know because I was called after he got the room warmed up. I was called to come and fix his breakfast. And so every morning I get up and fix pancakes. And we always had prayer. And one time he wasn't well, and I prayed that the Lord would bless my daddy and make him well. And he never got over that. But Mother got pregnant with Evelyn, and she didn't feel like getting up so early in the morning as he had to get up. So I was elected, and morning after morning after morning, I made pancakes. Of course, they came out of a box.
After you moved away, Elmer took over, and he made oatmeal mush. There's one thing, if this has been told, cut it out, but in Daddy's patriarchal blessing, it's said that he would be able to take all of his children, to teach and take all of his children
children or something to that effect.
Okay, say that. Just state that one more time. I'm afraid I lost that about the patriarchal blessing.
Do you want to do it?
No, you were doing really good.
Well, with all of the knowledge that he taught us, it was easy for me to understand how he managed to fulfill his promise in his patriarchal blessing, which said that he would have the ability to take all of his children back to the celestial kingdom. And I'll just have to add this. Uncle Jerry, Evelyn's Jerry, said to Mother and Daddy once, I think it was just Mother, Belle, you should be very proud of the kind of family that you've raised. And every once in a while, when I get to feeling like I'm not worth much, I think of Daddy's patriarchal blessing and I say, make it come true.
This is Hazel.
Came out. That's a story about Ruth and Owen. Maybe Ruth can tell a story. But before they were married, Owen came to the door there on Madison Avenue Jefferson Avenue. This was before they went up with the house. They were still in the basement. Owen knocked on the door, and Dad answered the door, and he says, "Can I see your daughter Ruth?" And Dad looked at him. "Not dressed like that, you can't." Now, can somebody enlarge on that story?
Maybe he had shorts on, huh?
Yeah, he had shorts on. And nothing else he had on.
He had shorts on. Say that. Say what you're going to say.
Well, our dad was very...
Just a minute, let Mary say something.
I want to say about a man. You all treated Owen rotten. From mothers and everybody else. I'm going to say this. And I think that you've all had to.
Didn't even know him.
When we got married, and we were doing it against our parents' wishes, both sides, because my mother and
I
tell that?
how much paid rent. But I was married. I worked for 5 years before I was married, and even though 2 of them I lived in Salt Lake, I always paid Daddy money. It was $20.
When I turned 18, I got married, and I got out of all of these memories that you girls have, so I don't even understand what you're talking about.
No, well, I worked at Chris's and I did pay. I paid what Daddy told me. He asked so much for Mary because she made so much. She asked so much for me because I made so much. And Ruth made quite a bit more, and therefore Daddy expected more out of Ruth. He did.
He took it all. Do you know how much money I got?
You didn't work for 5 years, did you?
Oh, I worked. The next year, I was hired later, but I worked.
Yeah. When you were married, did you still pay Daddy? After you were married, no.
You talked about how they built the homes. Grandpa built their homes. They did pay him for it.
Daddy was getting a
Mary.
little easier to get, had more money as there was only 2 or 3 children left.
You came right when he was at the poorest.
And Ruth and the older ones were at the poorest. So Evelyn doesn't understand how we do that the depression. She thought she hit the depression too, but she didn't know what it was all about.
Tell us about your life in the Depression. I don't think we've even touched much on this.
Oh my gosh, we could.
I don't want to be recorded that, but
Say that again. They felt what?
Mary,
Just a minute. Just a minute. Don't get her rattled.
Where'd you get the idea that somebody
Just a minute. Okay. Grandpa didn't expect the boys to pay money because they needed it when they got married, but he did expect the girls to pay them after they worked.
And I feel very grateful that he taught me the value of money And to this day, it's hard for me to throw away money, which I could do. And I do not resent the help I gave to the folks because...
stand up on the freeway and throw it away?
Right. Because the folks, my parents have done more for me than I could ever pay them back. And the little bit I paid them, thank heavens I could pay them.
There's one thing about Dad, he taught the gospel.
Yeah.
Every one of us learned the gospel.
He gave us a testimony.
At his, and I had a testimony at the time I was in 8 years old in class, the 8-year-old class in Sunday school, and each fast day we would take turns bearing our testimony. We'd go down the road this way, then back this way, and then over this way, and each one would get up and bear the testimony as their turn came. And there was a couple of men in the corner back. Teacher was up here, in the corner back here, that were men from the Sunday school. And they stood there talking while we were giving our testimonies. And I thought, is anybody listening? And everybody that got up to bear their testimony would say, I believe, and I believe, and I believe. And I've got more of a testimony than that. That's not enough. When it came my turn, I stood up on my feet and I said, I know that Joseph Smith was a prophet, and etc. And there wasn't you couldn't hear a pin drop. And the two men back in the corner stopped talking, and the teacher stood there at attention, and all the kids listened, and I bore my testimony that I got from my dad.
At our ward Sunday, our state president came in and talked about welfare. Now, if anyone knew welfare, my father did. And what he said was, stand on your own 2 feet, and you take care of yourself, and don't you come running to the state president or the bishop over every little problem. It is your problem, and it is your children's problems. You take care of one another first, but your family comes first. You can pray for the poor, and pray for the needy. That is not enough. And your fast offering, oh, that's nice. You think you've done your part in paying your fast offering. But he said our stake is only about 1/3 people paying even fast offering. And he said, we have got to humble ourselves and stand on our own 2 feet. They are spending an awful lot of money to take care of all this stuff that is sent to the storehouse to get rid of the junk that they bring in. Now, the people that want to come and buy and take care, they want nice things too. So don't consider that the people that need it are the poor, junky people that don't want that kind of stuff. They want nice things too. So if you think you're living the gospel, it is the first commandment, is to take care of your family. And as far as I'm concerned, my dad did that. He taught me not to go to the bishop over every little problem and every dime that we can't afford. Sometimes I get mad at Mark and I say, honey, I'm sorry if we can't pay for this or that. Let's go to our bishop. And Mark, you ought to hear Mark. Mark says, oh, yes, that's the last thing you'll be hearing me do. But anyway, Dad lived that gospel.
We used to have a little red wagon, and Mother would say, Ruth, get the wagon and take, I don't know if you went with me, but anyway, somebody close my age. And we walked clear to town, way down on Grand Avenue somewhere, where they had bins of garbage. Mm-hmm. And in this was the old stuff that the farmers out there couldn't give away, so they put it in these bins. And Mother would say, it doesn't matter, Ruth, just bring it home. So we'd fill the little red wagon with this garbage, which was leaves of lettuce, leaves of cabbage, a few things like that. And bring them clear back home. And Mother would somehow have to make soup or something out of this food. And we did this day in and day out.
And we sold eggs. We had a lot of chickens, and we had to go out and sell eggs. We had very little garden, but we had a cow, and I, to this day, am not too crazy about chicken because we had chicken every Sunday. But we had, the thing that we really had the most was every Monday we had ground beans cooked on the back of the stove, and great big cinnamon rolls and biscuits. And so we had...
She couldn't stop if she Keep.
In the cinnamon rolls.
Well, Mother made the best rice pudding. I know that she baked it. I try to make that kind, but I can't. Mark would prefer a lot of juicy milk in it, but I know Mother must have used either a lot of cream in it, but she put it in the oven and have a kind of crust over it.
She took a can of milk and put a quart of water or more with it, and made the rice pudding with that. So it was only one can of milk.
It was creamy and delicious. Said about Daddy that I thought, Daddy was the best preacher you ever heard. And every time he got up in church, when it was his turn to give a talk, it was the best talk you ever heard. And I remember one time he talked about Kolob and that it being the closest place to where our Father in heaven lived. And he explained so much of it. And when he got through, I remember all my friends looking at me and me looking at them, and they'd said, they were so thrilled, they said, I never heard of Kolob before. But that was Daddy. He was a preacher. And not only that, but every time us little kids had to give our 2.5-minute talks, he wrote them and made us memorize them. Yeah. And so when I got mine memorized, and the next day I went across the street to the store to get something for Mother, and the man that was waiting on us said, are you that little girl that gave the talk in church? And I said, yes. And he says, well, you deserve a candy bar. And he gave me a candy bar. And I can still remember the last few words of that talk Daddy wrote. Those last few words said, for God is love. And I just remember
if you could hide a Kolob.
Oh, yeah.
I never heard of it.
This is one thing that I remember that our dad, Sister Parker, Clara Parker's mother, was president of the young lady, and Daddy was president of the young men in the Mutual. And if you know Sister Parker, she is the most organized lady, and she tried to run the Mutual, and it really disturbed Dad because Dad felt like she was trying to take over the Mutual. And he didn't say too much other than that, but I know he struggled with that because Dad knew that he knew what he could do when Dad...
I'm going to switch here now and say a little bit with everybody here about their mother, Isabel Myler Knowles.
My mother's an angel. She's the best teacher that I ever had in my life. She knew exactly what she wanted me to do, and she guided me and directed me. It was Mother who first told me in the 14th Ward to be like a certain lady because her language was so beautiful. And so I have been interested in language all my life. In fact, I took a special grammar class in college with just college teachers, and I was only an elementary teacher, and I did very well. Mother was the kind of person who said, Ruth, study hard, love books, learn to play the piano, do the things that are close to your heart, but get through school, go as far as you can afford to go, and use it. And I guess that's what I did, because I did not get a master's degree, but I have the equivalent. And I taught school for 30 years, hundreds of kids. And it was a great pleasure. In fact, my last day of school was one of the worst days of my life. And yet I was too ill to go on. So I loved Mother because she loved me. She showed me she loved me. And she taught me everything she knew. And then she saw to it that I found a way to get the rest myself.
Okay, Reva.
You were her pet. Talk louder.
Say that again.
By the time I came along, there were so many of them, and I was this scrungy little thing with no hair. And Ruth was beautiful, and Ruth was Mama's pet.
Yeah, we felt that.
I was obedient.
That's what we thought.
Mary felt that way too.
Did you have something you wanted to
No, say about Mother. Well, anything you want to say about Mother. Was she hot-tempered? Was she good? Whatever you want to say.
I don't have a brain in my head.
While she's thinking.
Well, I had a different mother than Ruth. My mother didn't teach me to go on to college and to get this big degree and marry a handsome man. My mother was in love with me for me. My mother knew I wasn't as smart as Ruth. Ruth would memorize immediately, and I would go over and over and over. So Mother didn't expect as much out of me as she did Ruth. But as the time went on and the years went on, my mother spent more time with me than she did Ruth. She'd come and stay at my house more because she felt much more comfortable around my husband. My husband is one of the nicest guys you'd ever want to meet. He let me take Mother downtown. He let me take her to Aunt Liza's, Aunt Ollie's, all of them. And Mark knew my time was with my mother when my mother came. My mother loved to shop with me. She wanted to wear the same clothes I did, but she did not look the same because she's much littler. But Mother loved me, and when Mother finally got to wear the beautiful shoes, they made so many shoes, with Mother being crippled. They finally got red and green and blue and all, and my mother was just like a little child. She'd cry when she'd get them. She was so happy. When I take Mother shopping, she had 4 and 5 clerks take care of her because Mother was a doll. She loved clothes, and if I'm going to go to hell because I love clothes, it's my mother's fault. Because every time I had a party or something, I'd bring home material, Mother'd make it up. I had to have a new dress for everything.
You sure did.
And my mother loved to dress me up. But my mother loved me for me. And I was held back a grade in school. I had a toe cut off. And like I said, I wasn't that smart. And Mother made me be right-handed. I am really a left-handed. My son Dennis and Susan and Mother was left-handed. And Mother took me to school and said, I absolutely want her to write with the right hand. I don't want her to be left-handed. So and Elmer was left-handed. So, but what was so wonderful about Mother was she's my best friend. And whenever I get sick, I'd call up, and she was at Mary's, and I'd cry, and I'd say, Mother, I just have to hear your voice. I don't feel very good. And Mother said, oh, my dear, I am so sorry that you don't feel good. And so anyway, Mother, when it come down to Evelyn, with Evelyn living so far away, she would say, oh, my darling daughter, oh, I'm so happy to see you. And Mary and I'd look at each other and say, she doesn't make that kind of fuss over us. And here Mary was taking care of Mother, and I was taking care of Mother, and she'd come down. But it's true. Ruth and Evelyn was Mother's prime. Well, but she loved us all in our personality way. And now that I am a mother and have children, I understand you handle each child differently, but you still love each child dearly.
Well, I knew my mother loved me, but I didn't think that she thought that I rated with the rest of my wonderful sisters. I never did think that until I got older and got to be a supervisor. And then she became very proud of me. After that, she always introduced me as the superintendent, and I was always the superintendent. But in my, in my middle years, I did well to be a B teacher, B student. I was not an A student only in a few things, and Ruth was an A student in everything. And I wrote a talk to give to compete with all the rest of the kids. And I wrote it. I did not copy it out of books. And then I took it home and I showed it to Mama. And I said, Mama, read this now and see what you think. And she read it and she said, give it to Ruth and have Ruth rewrite it. And so I gave it to Ruth and Ruth rewrote it. And one of the criticisms I got sounded too bookish. We're too smart. Come on, Mary.
I don't particularly want this recorded. This is just my opinion. With them opposing Owen's marriage. Anyway, to go on and leave that.
I haven't even put 2 words to get married.
Reva's remembrances of Hazel and Mother.
I remember that Hazel was going to get married, and Mama said, I don't care. Mother and Daddy were having a little argument over where you were going to get married. Mother wanted you to get married at home, and you wanted to get married over in Pocatello. And Mother says, well, I can't help it where she gets married, but she's going to have a wedding dress. And so Mother went down and bought some heavy white satin. And you see, these were in the 29s or somewhere around like that, wasn't it? 27. And the styles were so different. And so she made this dress for you, and it came up to about the middle or top of your knees in the front and clear down to your ankles in the back. And it fit in so cute, and it had pretty puffed sleeves in it. And then she lined the back of your skirt that hung down like that. Was it scalloped too? I just remember. And then they got you some tall-heeled white shoes.
White satin
shoes. And I thought Hazel was the most beautiful bride I'd ever seen. See, I was just a kid, I was about 3rd grade then. Oh, I thought you were just the prettiest thing that ever was.
I haven't anything to say.
I really think that Helen is more like Mother. Maybe Evelyn. They favor Mother more, and Helen's love for clothes and Mother had that love for clothes. And I think they had a lot of things in common, Helen and Mother.
Mother's love of people, in my opinion, first it was Ruth. Oh, Ruth was her doll. Mm-hmm. And then later on, Evelyn was her doll.
And Elmer very much.
Well, I don't remember much about the boys, but then finally, by the time Mother had lived at your house for a while, you became the doll. Now, you don't remember that, but you did. And the reason why I remember it so well is because I was taking care of her for a few days in there, a period of time when you went away.
She's referring to Mary.
Yeah, when Mary went away. So Mother was sitting there, and there had been a little bit of trouble with some of Evelyn's kids. And Mother was just really, really mad at Evelyn's kids. And I said to Mother, Now listen, Mama. You just have to realize that all these things come up, and you just have to forget them. They're not that terribly important. And I said, you're taking the attitude now that Evelyn's terrible and Mary's perfect because she was so angry at this one child of Evelyn's. And Mama, she just argued back and forth with me, and I finally thought I had her convinced, and I thought, good. Now I've got her convinced that she's got two lovely daughters. She doesn't have one lovely daughter and one daughter she's so mad at she can't stand. And so I thought it was all wonderful. And a half hour later, she brought it up again, and I'd swear she didn't hear a word I said. She felt exactly the same way. Evelyn, because her kids had done that. Something about a piano in somebody's house in Hyde Park and that. And boy, she was 100% for you and not for Evelyn.
Mother would
Oh, dear.
forgive them of anything they said.
Mm-hmm.
And
they loved us all, didn't they?
And you can't get at the bottom line. You can't get at the truth, because here you get this story here, and another person gets another story, and another story, and another story, and by the time you get them all together, how on earth do you ever get them together?
But what you just...
She just said they all love each other so much. It doesn't matter how they tell the story. They all have different ideas of how things happen, but that's not the bottom line. It's that they loved each other and cared about each other.
But it was true. We love to get together again and put you in family. But I said, just eliminate that. He talked about
Bit of quarreling at home.
We learned to forgive each other. And so now we can say something like Ruth just said to us about Owen and that. There isn't one of us mad at her. Not a one of us. And I think it's because, we did enough of that when we were young that, heck, Mary got mad at me and she'd slap me across the side of the face. But that didn't mean I didn't love Mary, and 5 minutes later she was letting me wear a best dress.